most people believe that they choose their political positions first, and then they pick a group that best represents those positions. But political science actually shows the inverse is true. People choose their beliefs not based on if they like the beliefs themselves, but based on the political party for which they identify with. People pick a party identity first, and then they just adopt whatever positions that party espouses. Sort of like picking a hockey team. You're with them through their wins, their losses, and of course, the ref is only wrong when it's against your own team. But when they call it issues in the other team, they're a great ref. This is a predictable human psychological pattern and something that we're going to be examining today. Let's start with a basic fact. Most people don't even know the policies they support. In fact, not only do they not only read the policies, oftentimes they don't even read the news articles. They skim it or read the headlines or see what's promoted on TikTok. This isn't speculation, nor is this my own opinion. The American National Election Studies, which is the gold standard in voter research, has consistently found that a large portion of voters cannot specify policy proposals on their own party. Many cannot correctly describe the opposing party's decisions. And most concerningly, they note that political knowledge does not necessarily correlate with how people vote. This means that people vote without policy literacy. This isn't by any means new information. However, I feel like it's not thoroughly discussed or talked at all enough. Policy identification is causal, not descriptive. People align based on what political party they're already in, not because of the actual policy itself. Studies by John Zahler and later confirmed by Akin and Bartels show that when party elites change positions, voters often follow, even when the new policy directly contradicts their previous policy. A classic example of this is the Trudeau government. They have contradicted themselves multiple times, but we're going to focus on their carbon tax. Now, if you are a Canadian and you don't know what the carbon tax is, essentially it is a tax on carbon emission. So this is paid, of course, by corporations that are emitting, but also by the direct end user consumer. When we fill up our gas tank, for example, we are paying a carbon tax in addition to the gas price, which definitely makes a difference. This policy was first introduced in 2015 and was upheld all the way to 2022. The Trudeau government had a very firm stance on the carbon tax. They believed that it had to be universal in order for it to work. However, in 2023, when their popularity was on the significant decline, Trudeau walked this back and he issued a pause on the carbon tax. This was antithetical to their previous position because they held that the carbon tax had to be maintained universally in order for it to work. However, their supporters who were pro-carbon tax still followed them even with the pause. They didn't go against their party, they just shifted their beliefs so it aligned with their party. This is just one of many examples, but it highlights a key fact. Voters will reverse their own stance on government spending, trade, military spending only after the elites in their party group reposition. So instead of reading the policy and seeing if that aligns with their belief system, they change their belief system so it aligns with the policy. This means that most beliefs are outputs and not inputs. The parties themselves don't respond to the voters, but it's the voters who respond to the parties. This is something called motivated reasoning, and it actually replaces critical evaluation entirely. Once their political identity is established, their reasoning changes fundamentally. People don't critically assess the effectiveness of the policy. Rather, they read the policy and assess whether it already aligns with the norms in their group. In a 2018 study by Pennell et al., it studied this phenomenon firsthand. They presented over 2,000 participants with non-political and non-religious statements. Specifically, these statements were chosen to be vague and largely agreeable. However, when they presented the statements, they made it so the source seemed like it came from a political or a religious camp. Say, for example, they took a vague source, they would have just wrote Conservative Party or Liberal Party under it, something to that nature. And their findings were really consistent with this idea of motivated reasoning. They found that people were significantly more likely to agree with a statement if it was ideologically aligned with their own camp, and significantly less likely to agree to a statement if it was an opposing source. The participants found the statements to be contextual when it was their own party and disagreeable when it was in opposition. And again, these statements were very vague to begin with. They were supposed to be largely agreeable to the masses. biases, so they shouldn't have had this significant finding. This is, of course, hypocritical, but we're humans and we have many flaws. A lot of psychologists define this as identity protective cognition, where you're merely trying to protect your own identity mindset. I actually had this idea for this video when I was watching my university's hockey game this weekend. Now, just for context, this was a home game, so the entire stadium was full of our university's fans and everybody was there to support our university's team. And we did win, I'll just note that. But when we were playing, one of our team members literally pushed down another player when he was trying to get back up from the ice. The guy had like slipped or something, and our player literally pushed him down, literally kicked him when he was down. And the entire stadium was going mental. Like, these guys were cheering them on and egging them on. However, the only thing that I was thinking is if the roles were reversed, you guys would be begging the ref to come in there. And it's so interesting to me because when I'm watching this, it feels as though this is a moment that you cannot possibly perceive with a good lens. I mean, pushing somebody down, literally when they're down, shows a huge lack of integrity. And I definitely was not in support of my team in that moment, but everybody else was. Now, I understand that a sports team is of course different than politics. However, I think the whole team identity and groupthink is the same principle. When a political leader, an elite, or a team player in our own group does something wrong, we are significantly less likely to own up to the fact that objectively that was wrong, or even to acknowledge that the other side may have been hurt or have good points. Now, turning back to politics, I think one of the reasons that we are less likely to even acknowledge that the other side has some good points, and absolutely, I can tell you right now, the other side always is going to have good points because we're humans, we're critical thinkers, everybody has something positive to offer. But if policy literacy is low, then having some sort of critical debate is, meaningless because people aren't listening to the policy facts themselves. They're only listening and filtering it through the bias of their groupthink. In fact, engaging in any sort of debate actually challenges your group identity because it forces you to have to reconcile trade-offs, uncertainty, or internal disagreement. Identity messaging avoids all of that because it prioritizes the political community and not the policy itself. I'm sure if you've been on social media or even looking through the news articles themselves, you'll definitely notice this sort of political framing.
Unfortunately, some members of the media
use their platforms to push their own personal bias. And agenda to control exactly what people think. This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
I find particularly now news articles are focusing more on moral framing, cultural symbolism, and this whole concept of villains and heroes or good versus bad, and the world really isn't like that. There are no truly bad guys. News articles and social media actually perpetuate this whole idea of good versus evil because that is what is likely to go viral on the internet. Unfortunately, having an honest, nuanced debate in which you are acknowledging the faults of your own party and seeing the good in others is just not something that goes viral. And again, this isn't just a theory or my opinion. It's actually backed by research from the Pew and MIT. They show that emotionally charged political content spreads faster than informational content. Outreach actually increases sharing regardless of accuracy, and algorithmic amplification favors group conflict over clarification. Democracy assumes that voters will punish government failures, and sometimes they do, don't get me wrong. I mean, with the Trudeau government, every single person I knew, even the most liberal of liberals, hated him towards the end. However, it's not happening in nearly as much as it should be happening. Our society is becoming so increasingly polarized. It seems like literally everything has to have a political skew to it. And I think that this is a really big problem because it tears down the community instead of unifying us all in this, collective experience that we're all humans and we're all neighbors and wanting to figure out things together. And loyalty for our group party overrides critical thinking. Accountability for that party entirely collapses. Instead of holding elites to their high standard, voters defend them. They defend economic failures, ethical violation, and broken promises as long as it's their team. But of course, if it's not, it's fair game. I'm definitely not saying that this is authoritarianism because it absolutely is not. We are so blessed. If you're in Canada or a Western nation, we are so blessed to be living in a free country, but I do think it is democratic decay. And this is something that we definitely need to be watching out for, especially as our politics our political landscape is becoming so increasingly polarized. This is something that everybody struggles with, myself included. It's an unconscious human flaw that we are all working towards. We all want to be part of a team and part of a community. The only way that we can counteract this bias that we all have is to have internal dissent. That is to criticize the media that we're seeing from our own coalition. That is to challenge the ideas that we believe to be true, and also hearing out the other side, because I guarantee you they have something to offer, and it's important that we listen to all sides to be able to have our own informed opinion, not just ones that benefit our party. If you've made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Please leave me a like if you enjoyed it, and comment below and let me know your opinion on this. Please consider subscribing and joining our community. I like to have these kind of conversations every now and again. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one.